Chapter 6. 15 days passed uneventfully. We left each other alone.
I heard Vasu come and go. His jeep would arrive at the yard. I could hear that mighty fist pulling the brake, and feet stumping upstairs. Honored all his impossible qualities, Lai had just one virtue. He didn't try to come to my part of the building. He arrived and departed as he liked.
Only the stench of drying leather was on the increase. It disturbed the neighborhood. I had a visitor from the health department one fine day, a man in khaki uniform.
He was a sanitary inspector whose main business was to try to keep the city clean, a hard job for a man in a place like Malgudi, where the individual jealously guarded his right to independent action. The sanitary inspector occasionally came to my press and sat quietly in a chair when his limbs ached from too much supervision of the market road. He would take off his pith helmet. I think he was the only one in the whole town who had such headgear. Having picked it up at an army disposal store, place it on the chair next to him, wipe his brow with a checked-colored handkerchief, sigh, and punt and call for a glass of water.
I could not say he was a friend, but a friendly man. Today he leaned his bicycle on the front step of my press and came in, saying, "There is a complaint against you." He produced from his pocket an envelope, took out a sheet of paper, and held it to me.
I was beginning to dread the sight of brown envelopes nowadays. A joint petition from my neighbors, signed by half a dozen names, had been presented to the municipal authority. They complained that on my terrace they noticed strange activities, animal hides being tanned. The petitioners pointed out that tanning and curing of skins was prohibited in a residential area as it gave rise to bad odor and unsanitary surroundings.
They also complained of carrion birds hovering around my terrace. One part of my mind admired my neighbors for caring so much for sanitation, while the rest of it was seized with cold despair. I requested the inspector to take a seat and asked what he expected me to do.
He said, "Can I have a glass of water?" I called Sastri to fetch the water. After gulping it down in one mouthful, the sanitary inspector, the most parched and dehydrated man I had ever seen in my life, said, "By law X definitely prohibits the tanning of leather indiscriminately in dwelling areas. By law Y specifies exactly where you can conduct such a business."
I did not know you were engaged in this activity. Why? Is your press not paying enough?
I slapped my brow with my palm in sheer despair. I have not turned a tanner, I cried.
I am still a printer. What makes you think so? Where is the harm? Asked the inspector. There is dignity in every profession.
You don't have to be ashamed of it, only you must carry it on at the proper spot without violating the bylaws. All right, I'll do so. 55. I said meekly.
Oh, it's good you will cooperate with us. That is the difference between educated people and uneducated ones. You can grasp our problems immediately.
Of course, people will do wrong things out of ignorance. How can we expect everyone to be versed in municipal bylaws? I never blame a man for not knowing the regulations, but I'm really upset if people don't mend their ways even after a notice has been issued.
May I have another glass of water, please? Oh, surely, as many as you want. Mr. Sastri, another glass of water.
I could hear Sastri put away the urgent job he was doing and prepare to fetch the glass. The inspector emptied the second supply of water at one gulp and rose to go. He said while parting, "I'll send off an endorsement to the parties, something to silence them."
What will you say? I asked, a sudden curiosity getting the upper hand. We have a printed form which will go to them to say that the matter is receiving attention.
That is enough to satisfy most parties. Otherwise they'll bombard us with reminders. I saw him off at the step of my press.
He clutched the handle of his bicycle, stood for a moment thinking, and said, "Take your time to shift, but don't be too long. If you get a notice, please send a reply to say that you are shifting your tanning business and pray for time." "Yes, sir," I said. "I'll certainly do all that you say."
I was beginning to realize that it was futile to speak about any matter to anyone. People went about with fixed notions and seldom listened to anything I said. It was less strenuous to let them cherish their own silly ideas.
The septuagenarian came tapping his stick. He stood on the road, looked up through his glasses, shading his eyes with one hand, and asked in a querulous voice, "Is Nataraj in?" The usual crowd was in. "Now is the testing time for Nehru," our journalist was saying.
If the Chinese on our border are not rolled back, The poet had brought the next canto of his verse and was waiting to give me a summary of it. The septuagenarian asked again, "Is Nataraj here?" unable to see inside, owing to the glare.
Yes, yes, I'm here, I cried, and went down to help him up the steps. He seated himself and looked at the other two. Your friends?
I may speak freely, I suppose? I introduced them to him, whereupon he expatiated on the qualities of a poet, and his duties and social relationships, and then turned to me with the business at hand. Nataraj, you know my grandson had a pet, a dog that he had been keeping for 2 years.
He was very devoted to it, and used to play with it the moment he came back from school. I almost foresaw what was coming. Someone killed it last night.
It lay under the street lamp, shot through the heart. Someone seems to have shot it with a gun, you know. Who has a gun here in these parts? I thought no one but the police had guns.
Why did you let it out? Why? I don't know.
It generally jumps over the wall and goes around the neighborhood. It was a harmless dog, only barking all night, you know, sitting under that street light. I don't know what makes these dogs bark all night.
They say that ghosts are visible to the eyes of a dog. Is it true? Do you believe in ghosts?
I haven't been able to see any, I began. Oh, that's all right. Most people don't see them.
Why should they? What was I saying? He asked pathetically, having lost track of his own sentence.
I was loath to remind him. I hesitated and wavered, hoping that he'd forget the theme of the dead dog and concentrate on the ghosts. But the journalist said, "You were speaking about the dog, sir."
Ah, yes, yes. I could not bear to see its corpse, and so I asked the scavenger to take it away. I don't know what you call that breed.
We called it Tom, and it was black and hairy, very handsome. Someone brought it from Bombay and gave it to my son, who gave it to this little fellow, quite a smart dog, very watchful, would make such a row if anyone tried to enter our gate. Would wait for me to get up from my morning prayer, because he knew he would get a piece of the bread I eat in the morning. The last 3 years doctors have asked me to eat only bread, one slice of it.
Before that I used to take idli every day, but they think it's not good for me. My father lived to be 100 and never missed idli even for a single day. He remained silently thinking of those days.
I was glad he was not asking to be reminded of his main theme. I hoped he would get up and go away. Everyone maintained a respectful, gloomy silence.
If it had continued another minute, he would have risen and I'd have helped him down the steps. But just at the crucial moment, Sastri came in with a proof for my approval. As soon as he entered by the curtain, instead of handing me the proof and disappearing, he stood arrested for a minute, staring at the old man.
What was all that commotion at your gate this morning? I was coming to the press and had no time to stop and ask. But I saw your grandchild crying.
Oh, is that you, Sastri? Asked the old man, shrinking his eyes to slits in order to catch his features. How are you, Sastri? It's many months since I saw you.
What are you doing? Yes, of course I know you are working with Nataraj. How do you find his work, Nataraj?
Good? Must be good. His uncle was my classmate, and he had married the third daughter of.
He used to come and play with my nephew. Where do you live, Sastri? Not near us?
Sastri mentioned his present address. Oh, that is far off, Vinayak Street. Ah, how many centuries it seems to me since I went that way. Come and see me sometime, I'll be pleased.
Sastri seemed the more pleased of the two to be thus invited. He said, I must come sometime. How many children have you?
Sastri mentioned the number, at which the old man looked gratified and said, Bring them along also when you come. I'd like to see them. Instead of saying, yes, and shutting up, Sastri said, Even this morning I could have come for a moment, but there was too much crowd at your gate.
Oh, idiot Sastri! What on earth are you becoming so loquacious for? I muttered to myself.
Leave him alone to forget this morning's crowd. But he had stirred up mischief. Didn't you know why there was a crowd? No, I only saw your grandchild crying.
The reminder of his grandchild nearly brought the septuagenarian to the verge of a breakdown. The old man almost sobbed. That boy is refusing to cheer up.
I can't bear to see that youngster in such misery. Why? Why?
What happened? Asked Sastri. Someone had shot his pet dog, said the journalist. Shot! Shot! Cried Sastri as if he had been poked with the butt of a rifle.
When? Was it shot dead? Oh, poor dog.
I have often seen it at your gate, a black one. Why was he bent upon adding fuel to the fire? Do you know who could have shot it? Asked Sastri menacingly.
For what purpose? Said the old man. It's not going to help us. Will it bring Tom back to life?
But Sastri insisted on enlightening him. He gave the old man the killer's name, whereabouts, and situation, and added, he is just the man who could have done it. The old man tapped his staff on the floor and shouted at me, and yet you said nothing?
Why? Why? It didn't occur to me, that is all, I said hollowly. The old man tapped the floor with his staff and cried, show me where he is, I'll deal with him.
I'll hand him over to the police for shooting at things. What's your connection with him? Is he related to you?
Is he your friend? I tried to pacify the old man. But he ignored my words.
In all my 70 years, this is the first time I've heard of a shooting in our street. Who is this man? Why should you harbor him?
Tomorrow he'll aim his gun at the children playing in the street. Knowing Vasu's style of speechery with children, I could agree with the old man's views.
The old man's hands and legs trembled, his face was flushed. I feared he might get a stroke and collapse in my press. Anything seemed possible in my press these days. I said, be calm, sir, it will not do to get excited.
It's not good for you. If it's not good for me, let me die. Why should anything be good for me?
Death will be more welcome to me than the sight of my unhappy grandson. I'll get him another dog, sir, please tell him that, a beautiful black one. I promise.
Can you? Asked the old man, suddenly calming down. Are you sure? You know where one is to be found?
Oil, yes, I said. Easiest thing. I know many planters who have dogs, and I can always get a puppy for our little friend.
Will you accompany me now and say that to him? Oh, surely, I said, rising. Sastri chose just this moment to thrust the proof before me and ask, shall I put it on the machine?
I didn't want anything to stop the old man from getting up and going, so I said, wait a moment, I'll be back. But Sastri would not allow me to go. If you pass this proof, we can print it off, everything is ready.
They are shutting off power at 11 o'clock today. If we don't deliver, oh, Sastri, leave everything alone. I don't care what happens.
I must see the child first and comfort him. I was desperately anxious that the old man should be bundled off before someone or other should offer to point out Vasu, as Lai became more aloof, Lai became more indifferent, and everything that he did looked like a challenge to me. I was, I suppose, getting into a state of abnormal watchfulness and challenge myself. Even the sound of his footsteps seemed to me aggressively tenant-like, strengthened by the laws of the rent control court.
He pretended that I never existed. He seemed to arrive and depart with a swagger as if to say, you may have got an adjournment now, but the noose is being readied for you. He brought in more and more dead creatures. There was no space for him in his room or on the terrace.
Every inch of space must have been cluttered with packing boards and nails and skins and molds. The narrow staircase, at which I could sometimes peep from my machine, was getting filled up with his merchandise, which had now reached the last step. He had left just enough margin for himself to move up and down. He had become very busy these days, always arriving, departing, hauling up something or hauling down packing cases, doing everything single-handed.
I had no idea where his market was. In other days I could have asked him, but now we were bitter enemies. I admired his capacity for work, for all the dreadful things he was able to accomplish single-handed.
If we had been on speaking terms, I'd have congratulated him unreservedly on his success as a taxidermist. His master Suleiman must really have been as great as he described him. He had given his star pupil expert training in all branches of his work. Short of creating the animals, he did everything.
Vasu was a perfect enemy. When I caught a glimpse of him sometimes while I stood at the treadle, he averted his head and passed, perhaps stamping his feet and muttering a curse. He seemed to be flourishing.
I wondered why he should not pay me the charges for printing his forms and letterheads. How to ask him? I did not want to do anything that might madden him further.
I was beginning to miss his rough company. I often speculated if there could be some way of telling him that all was well, and that he should not give another thought to what had happened between us, that Lai could stay in my house as long as he pleased. Only don't bring too many carcasses or keep them too long. This is a fussy neighborhood, you know. I could never be a successful enemy to anyone.
Any enmity worried me night and day. As a schoolboy, I persistently shadowed the person with whom I was supposed to be on terms of hate and hostility. I felt acutely uneasy as long as our enmity lasted.
As we started home from school, I was never more than a few paces away from the boy who declared himself my enemy. I sat in a bench immediately behind him and tried to attract his attention by coughing and clearing my throat or by brushing against his back while picking up a pencil deliberately dropped on the floor. I made myself abject in order to win a favorable look or word from my enemy and waited for a chance to tell him that I wanted to be friends with him.
It bothered me like a toothache. I was becoming aware of the same mood developing in me now. I was longing for a word with Vasu.
I stood like a child at the treadle, hoping he would look at me and nod and all would be well again. He was a terrible specimen of human being, no doubt, but I wanted to be on talking terms with him. This was a complex mood.
I couldn't say that I liked him or approved of anything he said or did, but I didn't want to be repelled by him. My mind seethed with plans as to how to re-establish cordiality. I was torn between the desire to make a grand gesture, such as writing off his print bill, and my inability to carry it out, as I didn't like the idea of writing off anything. I liked to delude myself that I collected my money strictly and never let anyone get away with it.
So I decided not to rake up the question of the bill with Vasu until a smiling relationship could once again be established between us and I could refer to the question in a sort of humorous manner. While I was in this state of mental confusion, Sastri came up with a new problem. There was a hyena at the foot of the stairs, the sight of which upset him while he was composing the admission cards of Albert Mission High School.
I was at my usual place, and he parted the curtain and cried, "How can I do any work with a wolf and a whatnot staring at me? And a python is hanging down the handrail of the stairs." I was all alone in the parlor.
Sastri, I saw it. It is not a wolf but a hyena. Don't you think it surprising that we should be having all this life around us in Malgudi? So near. They are all from Mempi Hills.
The educational value of it was lost on Sastri. He simply said, "Maybe, but why should they be here? Can't you do something about it?"
It's repulsive, and there is always a bad smell around. All my life I have tried to keep this press so clean. I could see that Sastri was greatly exercised.
There was no use joking with him or trying to make him take a lighter view of it. I feared that he might take steps himself, if I showed indifference. He might call Vasu through the grill that separated us and order him to be gone with the wolf.
I didn't want Sastri to risk his life doing it. So I said placatingly, "Sastri, you know the old proverb, that when your cloth is caught in the thorns of a bush, you have to extricate yourself gently and little by little, otherwise you will never take the cloth whole." Sastri, being an orthodox-minded Sanskrit semi-scholar, appreciated this sentiment and the phrases in which it was couched, and capped it witly a profounder one in Sanskrit which said that to deal with a Rakshluisa one must possess the marksmanship of a hunter, the wit of a pandit and the guile of a harlot.
He quoted a verse to prove it. But the trouble is that the marksmanship is with him, not with us. Anyway, he'll soon deplete the forest of all its creatures, and then no doubt he will have to turn to a tame life, and our staircase will be clear again.
He fits all the definitions of a Raks Jyasa, persisted Sastri. And he went on to define the makeup of a Rakshasa, or a demoniac creature who possessed enormous strength, strange powers, and genius, but recognized no sort of restraints of man or God. He said, every Rakshasa gets swollen with his ego. He thinks he is invincible, beyond every law.
But sooner or later something or other will destroy him. He stood expatiating on the lives of various demons in Puranas to prove his point. He displayed great versatility and knowledge.
I found his talk enlightening, but still felt he might go on with the printing of the school admission cards, which were due to be delivered 72 hours hence, but I had not the heart to remind him of sordid things. He went on talking. His information was encyclopedic. He removed his silver-rimmed spectacles and put them away in his shirt pocket as being an impediment to his discourse.
There was Ravana, the protagonist in Ramayana, who had 10 heads and 20 arms, and enormous yogic and physical powers, and a boon from the gods that he could never be vanquished. The earth shook under his tyranny. Still he came to a sad end.
Or take Mahisha, the Asura who meditated and acquired a boon of immortality and invincibility, and who had obtained the special favor that every drop of blood shed from his body should give rise to another demon in his own image and strength, and who nevertheless was destroyed. The goddess with 6 arms, each bearing a different weapon, came to fight him riding on a lion which sucked every drop of blood drawn from the demon. Then there was Bhasmasura, who acquired a special boon that everything he touched should be scorched, while nothing could ever destroy him.
He made humanity suffer. God Vishnu incarnated as a dancer of great beauty, named Mohini. The Asura became infatuated with her, and she promised to yield to him only if he imitated all the gestures and movements of her own dancing.
So a dance began. The demon was an accomplished one. At one point of the dance, Mohini placed her palms on her own head, and the demon followed this gesture in complete forgetfulness and was reduced to ashes that very second, his blighting touch becoming active on his own head. Every man can think that he is great and will live forever, but no one can guess from which quarter his doom will come. Vasu seemed to have induced in Sastri much philosophical thought.
Before he left, his parting anecdote was, or think of Daksha, for whom an end was prophesied through the bite of a snake, and he had built himself an island fortress to await this fate, and yet in the end. And so on and so forth, which was very encouraging for me too, as I felt that everything would pass and that my attack would be free from this man. I hoped we would part on speaking terms, but Sastri did not think it necessary.
I was glad he found a solution to his problem through his own research and talk, and left me without asking me to throw out the hyena. He vanished behind the curtain as he suddenly remembered that he had left the machine idle and that the ink on the plate was drying. My only aim now was to save the situation from becoming worse and gradually to come back to a hello-saying stage with Vasu.
But it was not destined to be so. One fine morning the forester came to my press to ask if Vasu was still with me. I thought he had come to get his book of morals printed, and said, I have not forgotten my promise, and just as soon as I am able.
He didn't seem interested, but said, all right, I am in no hurry about anything, but I am here on official work. Is Vasu still here? If he is, I'd like to speak to him.
A sudden doubt assailed me whether it would be safe to be involved in this. The forester might have come as a friend, or he might not. So I said dodgingly, I'm not seeing much of Vasu nowadays, although he lives upstairs.
He seems to be very busy nowadays. With what? I became cautious. I don't know.
I see him coming and going. He has his own business. Has he?
That's what I want to find out. Would you answer some questions? No, I said point blank. I wish to have nothing to do with anything that concerns him.
Rather strange. He said. He had seemed such a timid morals compiling man some months ago when he first visited me.
It surprised me to find him adopting a tough tone. He continued, he is your tenant, as everybody knows, and he claims your friendship. What do you mean by disclaiming all knowledge of him?
Is it believable? Yes. You should believe what I say.
Won't you sit down and talk? No, I'm spending the government's hours now. I'm here on official duty, and they are certainly not paying me to lounge in your chairs. I must get busy with what I'm here for.
This thin, cadaverous man, whose neck shot straight out of his khaki collar like a thin cylindrical water pipe, was tough. He said, any man who violates the game laws is my enemy. I wouldn't hesitate to shoot him if I had a chance.
A lot of game has been vanishing from our reserves, and even tigers disappear from the blocks. Where do they go? Perhaps to other forests for a change, I said.
He laughed. It was a good joke, in his view. I hoped that this piece of humor would establish a bond between us. That shows your ignorance of wildlife.
I felt relieved that he recognized it. That would certainly induce him to view me with greater toleration and absolve me from all responsibility for what Vasu was doing. He recovered his composure, as if he realized that he should not spoil me by smiling too much, and suddenly compressed his lips into a tight, narrow line and became grim.
He said, joking apart, I shall lose my job if I don't track down this mischief going on in the forests of Mempi. Somebody is busy with his gun. Can't you watch out?
I asked. Yes, but in a forest of hundreds of miles you can't watch every inch of ground, especially if the thief operates at night. Some of our guards are none too honest.
We depend in some places on the jungle dwellers, and they are not wholly dependable. I must first have a talk with your tenant. He is not my tenant.
I take no rent from him. Then he must be your friend, said the man, and I recognized the pincer movement in which this man was trying to trap me as all the others had done. I said, he is not even my friend.
I never knew him before. This sounded even worse than the others. Much better remain his friend or landlord than his business associate. I could see the cadaverous face before me hardening with suspicion.
He thought over his situation for a moment and asked, why don't you help me? In what way? I want to get at this man who is destroying game. Can't you give me some clues?
We came around to the same starting point again, and I said, I wish to have nothing whatever to do with this business of yours. Leave me out of it. What makes you think I should have anything to do with it? Since you are not his friend, why don't you help me? I am not your friend either, I said.
It seemed silly to carry on a talk like this early in the day, while the market road traffic was flowing by and the treadle was rolling on nicely with the admission cards. Carry on a vague talk on friendship with an obstinate cadaver. I said with an air of finality, if you want to rest, come in and take a chair. Do I go through here to reach his room?
No, it's blocked this way. He has his own door. He stepped down without a word and went away.
I could read his mind. He was now convinced that I was a joint owner of the poaching and stuffing factory. He went out with the expression that when the time came, he'd round up the gang.
I heard him go up the staircase and knock on the door. Vasu was unused to having visitors. He shouted from inside, who is it?
I heard the other reply, I wish to see you for a minute. Open the door, please. I asked, who are you?
What is your name? I am Ramaswamy. I want to see you.
Ramaswamy, whoever you may be, go down and wait near my jeep. I will be coming down in a short time. Why don't you let me in now? Vasu shouted from inside, don't you stand there and argue?
Get out and wait. I heard the forester go down the staircase, pausing for a moment to study the hyena. Half an hour later, steps once again tumbling down the stairs, and voices from the yard where the jeep were parked.
So you are Ramaswamy, are you? To what do I owe the honor of this visit? The cadaver was a match for Vasu.
He said something that wasn't clear to me. I had to follow all their conversation through the wall at my back, and it filtered out their exchanges in the lower octaves. I stood on a chair and opened slightly a high-up ventilator in the back wall in order to follow their conversation better.
The cadaver was repeating his statement about the disappearance of game from Mempi forest. And all that Vasu asked was, why not? The other merely said, game in the sanctuaries is expected to be preserved.
Of course it will be preserved if you take the help of a taxidermist who knows his job, said Vasu jocularly. Well, we may not take the taxidermist's help, but the taxidermist himself. By this time Vasu had climbed into his seat in the jeep. The forester was standing beside it.
What a contrast to the first day when he brought the forest official into my office and seated him and flattered him as a noble writer. We will watch, and when we get at the man who is depleting the reserve, well, the law is pretty clear on that. If your department needs my cooperation in any matter, don't hesitate to tell me, said Vasu with that crude cynicism he was capable of.
The forester ignored it, but said, how do you account for the hyena that you have on the staircase? That hyena Kani in search of me. I shot it right where you are standing now, he said. What about?
What about? Nothing, that's all. I am not bound to say anything.
From which forest did you get them? Not from your jungle. Go and look again to see if there is any trademark on them proving that they are from Mempi. India is a big country with many jungles, and you get everything everywhere.
For your information, I've also some tiger skins. Are they yours? Claim them if you can.
I'm hungry. I'm going out for breakfast. No time to waste. Don't bother me unless you come with some more practical proposition.
He drove off unceremoniously. The forester stood where he was for a second and moved away. Nothing happened for 2 days.
I was in my usual chair one afternoon when Vasu's jeep pulled up at my door. My heart gave a thump. He sat in the jeep and said, "Nataraj, come here."
I had an impulse to drop whatever I was doing and rush up to him to seize the chance to make friends with the monster again. But my pride was stronger. I suddenly resented all the trouble he had caused me.
"Come in and speak if you have anything to say." I was amazed at my own temerity. He grinned.
"Ah, you are showing some spirit after all. That's good." I didn't like the paternal tone he adopted.
I asked again, "What is your business with me?" "I'm rather busy." Yes, he said mockingly.
I see it, and it's good to see a man do an honest job at his office instead of chatting away the time with friends who treat the place as a club lounge. He went on shouting from his jeep, "I appreciate your guts, Nataraj. I had thought that you were rather spineless."
"I now know that you have a spine. I'd never have dreamed that you would set that ghost in khaki on me. You were smart to think it up."
"So that's your move. You want to know what I'll do next?" "No, I'm not interested. I'm busy."
You showed him the way to my room. "What of it? He sees all the things there."
"But hereafter ask your friend to put a rubber stamp on the backs of all the beasts in Mempi, so that he may identify them later and not make a fool of himself, and not make a fool of you either." And he drove off. Sain said, "I don't envy your luck in getting a man like that to live with."
I wondered what Vasu's menacing words might mean. Legally he had trapped me at the rent controller's court, and the adjournment lawyer was tapping me every now and then for a 5 or 10, but I now learned that he was satisfied if I gave him just a couple of rupees and made no mention of the money he owed me for printing his daughter's wedding card. I thought Vasu had done his worst, but now what did he mean?
I hoped he was not planning to abduct my son and hold him for ransom. He might be up to anything. That evening I told my wife, "If you have any urgent business to call me about, wait till I come home.
Don't send the little fellow across." She grew slightly nervous and asked, "Why?" "Why?"
I just said, "I don't want him to come there and make a fuss, that's all." "You see so little of him," she complained. And added, "You leave before he wakes and come home after he is asleep, and if he wants to see his father, he shouldn't even come to the press, I suppose."
And then I had to explain. She grew really frightened. She was in a panic. She kept the front door shut.
She grew completely demoralized if the boy did not come home at 6. She behaved as if the monster would be unleashed and come rushing in to swallow up the family if the back door of my press was opened. My son seemed to enjoy the thrill of the situation as long as there was daylight.
He spoke to his friends about the dangers that surrounded his life, and I saw batches of schoolboys standing around in knots in front of my press, looking up at the attic window, during the afternoon recess at school. I became curious and beckoned to a couple of children to come in. "What are you all doing here?"
"Nothing," said one of them. "We are going home from school." "What are you looking for?" I asked.
Babu said there was some giant here. "You want to look at him?" They nodded.
"Better not. Go home, boys. There is no such creature here."
I was anxious that they should not see Vasu, as they might shout and circle round him and infuriate him. Knowing his attitude to children, I did not want to risk a meeting. One of them asked slyly, "Is it true that he eats dogs?"
"Oh, no," I said immediately. "He eats rice and other stuff just as we do. That's all false."
"Then why did he shoot Ramu's dog?" "Oh, that? It was shot by mistake. He was expecting a black bear and had his gun ready, but just at that time this dog came."
"It was called Lily," said one boy. Another contradicted, "No, it was Tom." "No, it's Lily," persisted the boy.
"Yes, what'll you give me if it is Lily? Shall we go and ask Ramu?" 46 Yes, come on.
And they ran off as if they were a couple of birds that had alighted at the window and were flying off again. 2 other children who were watching the scene also ran off happily, shouting, "Let us ask Ramu." My son came up with Ramu one afternoon 2 days later.
Ramu said, "My grandfather asked me to see you." My son added, "He has come to ask for his dog." Several weeks had gone by since I had promised the septuagenarian that I'd replace his grandson's dog.
Although at that time it had seemed a perfectly feasible thing to find another dog, as days passed it began to look more and more difficult. I had promised in a moment of emotional stress, and now in the cold light of day it appeared to me an unreal, impossible task. I did not know how to acquire a puppy or where one was to be had.
I had no doubt mentioned some planter with a dog. I had in mind Achappa, a coffee planter on Mempi for whose estates I used to do printing work at one time. I remembered his saying that Lai had a Great Dane pair with 9 puppies.
Did I need one? That was years ago. Achappa was not to be seen nowadays. Occasionally his manager was noticed at my neighbor's press.
I walked across to the Star and said, "If you see anyone from Consolidated Estates, please call me." He replied that it was months since he had seen anyone from Consolidated Estates and suspected that Achappa was getting his printing done at Madras. So there it was.
The dog sources were drying up. I needed some expert help in the matter. I sincerely wanted to help the boy get another dog.
But my resources were poor. I had no time, Seater. Every day the boy came to my press and he always said, "My grandfather asked me to see you."
And every day I gave him some reply and sent him off. It was becoming a mechanical action. And the boy went away satisfied with any answer I gave.
My intentions were absolutely honest, but the press work was heavy nowadays. And I did not have a moment to spare. In addition to other work, Sane was giving me manifestos to print and the poet was fetching his cantos with greater speed.
With one thing and another my time flew swiftly each day. I had to work hard and make enough money at least to pay the lawyer whenever he held out his hand for cash. I had not given up hopes of recovering my dues from him, but I obeyed his advice not to mix up accounts.
I had no time actually to go out in search of a dog for the boy, but I had several plans in my head. I'd make a list of all my friends with dogs, tabulate each breed, note down their breeding time, fasten one or another of them to a promise that one of the litter would be given to me, make a round of visits on every Sunday afternoon, and finally pick up one for the young fellow. My son asked me at nights as he nestled close to me. As night advanced, the fear of the monster grew in him and he refused to sleep in a separate bed, as if he were a sharer of my dream. "Get me a puppy too, father, when you get one for Ramu."
Yes, I said. Why not? At the hyena corner one day, Sastri heard the jingling of bangles and turned to see a woman go down the steps and out of the building. He had been at the machine.
I was in the front office, and presently the curtain parted and he peeped in. A look at his face and I knew something was wrong, some matter referring to Vasu. His face was slightly flushed, and his spectacles wobbled as he raised and lowered his brow.
There was no need for preambles, and so I asked straight away, "What is the latest?" He swallowed once or twice before saying, "All sorts of low-class women are wandering around this press nowadays." Where?
Who are they? He flourished his arms upward, and I knew that he was indicating not the heavens, but Vasu. I did not like to pursue the subject because I had a couple of visitors waiting to discuss a printing job.
"Sastri, I will be with you in a moment." He took the hint and vanished into the wings. After persuading my would-be customers to patronize the original Heidelberg, I went in to conduct the research with Sastri.
He was printing the leaves of a bank ledger with a sullen face. I had never seen him so worried before. Even the first shock at finding a hyena beyond the grill was nothing to what he seemed to face now.
I stood beside him without a word except to sound bossy. "There is too much ink. Watch the inking."
He ignored my fussy advice and said, "If this sort of tiling goes on, our reputation in the town will be ruined." I saw Rangi going downstairs. Is it the sort of person we should encourage here?
Is this a printing press or what? Who is Rangi? He looked desperate, shy, and angry. I was enjoying his discomfiture immensely.
"Oh, you are asking as if you didn't know. How should you expect me to know anything of Rangi, Sastri? I have so much to do."
As if I had nothing else to do. I don't know anything about these people. Best thing, under the circumstances.
We should not have this kind of person seen in a place like this, that's all. I don't know what you are saying, Sastri. What is it all about? That man has started bringing all these disreputable people here, and then where are we?
Little by little I got it out of him. Rangi was a notorious character of the town. She lived in the shadows of Abu Lane.
She was the daughter of Padma, an old dancer attached to the temple of God Krishna, 4 streets off our ancient temple. Padma herself had been an exemplary traditional, dedicated woman of a temple, who could sing and dance, and who also took one or two wealthy lovers. She was now old and retired. Her daughter was Rangi.
Sastri darkly hinted that Lai knew who fathered her into this world, and I hoped it was not himself. His deep and comprehensive knowledge of the dancer's family was disconcerting. I had to ask him to explain how he managed to acquire so much information.
He felt a little shy at first and then explained. You know where my house is, and across from our road is Abu Lane, and so we know what goes on there. To be frank, I live in a portion of the house, the other half is occupied by Damodar, who has a wholesale grain shop in the market.
For many years he was keeping that woman, and after this daughter was born, he suspected Padma's fidelity and gave her up, but she threatened to go to a court to prove that he was the father, and finally he had to accept the situation and pay her a lot of money to get out of her clutches. He used to be a chum in our school days and he would never conceal his exploits from me. He went on to say that Padrana was now retired, being old, fat, and frightening, like the harem guards of Ravana.
Her daughter Rangi had succeeded her at the temple. Before that she studied in a school for a while, joined a drama troupe which toured the villages, and came back to the town after seducing all the menfolk she set eyes on. According to Sastri, she was the worst woman that could ever have come back to Malgudi.
Whatever it was, she seemed to be a subject of constant reference in Abu Lane and responsible for a great deal of the politics there. Next morning I was at the machine, after sending away Sastri to the binders to look to something. I heard the sound of a bangle, and there she was, Rangi, stepping between the hyena and the mongoose and making for the door.
She was dark, squat, seductive, with big round arms and fat legs, wearing a pink sari and overloaded with jewelry, and she was going out with the flowers in her hair crushed, and her clothes rumpled. She evidently didn't care how she looked now, this was her off hour. I couldn't imagine any woman who would be prepared to walk along the streets in this deshabille.
I felt curious to know what she would look like in the evenings. Perhaps she would powder her face, talcum floating uneasily over her ebonite skin. Anyway, whatever might be the hour, every inch of her proclaimed her to be what she was, a perfect female animal. But when did she come in?
How did she get home? She just walked off, was it? Going about her business with such assurance.
Walking in and out of a place like a postman. My mind seethed with speculations. Did Vasu bring her in his jeep at the darkest hour?
Not likely. What a man, who could turn his mistress out in cold blood when morning came? My further speculations on the theme of lust were cut short by the arrival of Sastri, who said, "The binder says that one of his office boys is down with mumps, and that he cannot do the ruling until Friday."
He said this in a tone of utter fatalism. "The sky is not going to fall because he puts it off till Friday," I said. "Unless the ruling is done, the ledger for the bank won't be ready and they'll come down on us."
Why was this Sastri always in a state of panic lest we should fail one or another of our customers? He had no trust in my ability to manage things and no sort of confidence in me. I felt indignant.
No need for panic. I have run this press for how many years? I've managed to survive and flourish, and so far not made a fool of myself.
So why do you worry? I could not conclude. There was no conclusion as there was no basis at all for beginning the sentence.
My mind was busy following the fleshy image of Rangi, and perhaps I resented the intrusion. I was mistaken in thinking that Rangi was all. I had only to stand there between 7 and 8 in the morning, and it became a sort of game to speculate who would be descending the stairs next.
Sometimes a slim girl went by, sometimes a fair one, sometimes an in-between type, sometimes a fuzzy-haired woman, sometimes another, some mornings a fashionable one who had taken the trouble to tidy herself up before coming out, most times, Rangi also, along with one or another of them, or by herself. Brisk traffic passed on the staircase. I guessed that after the challenge from the cadaver, Mempi Forest was watched more carefully, and Vasu's activities were neutralized, and so he had turned his tracking instinct in another direction.
I had no notion that our town possessed such a varied supply of women.